Good evening. Before we begin, if you haven't already done so, I'd like to request that you please silence your cell phones. Thank you. Tonight on Yom HaShoah, and as we mark the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, we gather in solemn remembrance. We honor the memory of the 6 million Jews who perished, pay tribute to the courage and resilience of the survivors, and recommit ourselves to standing against hatred, bigotry, and discrimination in all its forms. As the number of living Holocaust survivors continues to dwindle, the urgency of remembrance becomes ever more pressing. Their stories must continue to be told, not only to preserve history, but to safeguard our future. On this somber occasion, we also celebrate the enduring spirit of the Jewish people. We reaffirm our responsibility to educate the next generation about the atrocities that occurred in Auschwitz and across Nazi-occupied Europe. And we renew our vow to confront anti-Semitism wherever it appears and to stand united in the fight against all forms of intolerance. We also reaffirm our unbreakable bond with the State of Israel and the values we share as we advocate and pray for the immediate release of the remaining hostages. This evening's commemoration is more than a reflection on the past. It is also a call to action, a reminder that the lessons of the Holocaust must shape our present and our future so that never again is not merely a phrase, but a promise. I'd like to call on Alexis. Please rise for the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose of stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the waters red glare, the bursting
In early May 1945, when Nazi Germany unconditionally surrendered to Allied forces, jubilation spread throughout the world. World War II in Europe had come to an end, although fighting still continued for several months in the Far East. This was a war that had wreaked destruction on a scale unprecedented in history. Roughly 80 million dead, millions of refugees of many nationalities spread throughout Europe and beyond. Cities destroyed and infrastructures shattered. Allied soldiers banded together on the smoldering ruins of Berlin. And military parades and public celebrations took place all over the world, as well as on the European continent, just freed from the clutches of the Nazi regime. Yet one nation did not take part in the general euphoria: the Jewish people. For them, victory had come too late. The day of liberation, the one for which Jews had longed throughout the years of the Holocaust, was for the most part a day of crisis and emptiness, a feeling of overwhelming loneliness as the sheer scale of the destruction was grasped on both a personal and communal level. The reading we're about to recite is taken from the testimony of survivor Bella Braver, and it reflects this feeling of despair. Please join me as we read responsively. The camp guard who came to open the gate said, "You are free and you can leave."
All the guards of the walls that used to stand in every corner as it disappeared. It was all gone, as though it had never been. It was one of the miracles.
The Russians entered, and we were in such a condition that no one moved, no one went out.
We did not laugh, we were not happy, we were apathetic. The Russians came, and General came in. We did.
He told us that he was delighted, as this was the first camp in which he had found people still alive.
He started crying, but we didn't. He wept, and we didn't.
I have since seen the movie made about Buchenwald. The stacks of bodies is vividly displayed in the movie, just as I saw it the first day, but it's not the same. In no way is it the same. The black and white film did not depict the dirty, gray-green color of those bodies, and what it could not possibly capture was the odor, the smell, the stink. Watching the movie was, in a way, a reliving of the first walkthrough of those stacks of bodies. The above words from an American liberator reflect a common response by the GI who came upon the concentration camps. Almost every day, World War II veterans and their families uncovered extremely graphic photographs taken from the liberation of the Nazi concentration camps. These photographs provide powerful documentation of the crimes of the Nazi era. Many photos were published as postcards by the U.S. Army Signal Corps. Imagine receiving a postcard from your GI son depicting an emaciated prisoner or corpse. But the point of the photos was to not deny, and rather to promote the sheer evil of the Nazi regime's efforts to destroy the Jewish people. In our area, many of their families did indeed discover pictures and wanted to find a permanent and meaningful home for these photographs. That is how here at the Holocaust Resource Center, we came to have several collections of profound pictures in our possession. The photos tell an enduring story of the horror that these liberators encountered. We share a few of the photos with you this evening. In 2010, we were introduced on this very stage to a liberator of Dachau, Donald Burdick. From that moment, Don was a staple of our speakers to school students in the Lehigh Valley. Students easily related to his salt of the earth presentation style and recognized in him their own grandparents who had served. His oft-repeated message of, "Don't tell me the Holocaust didn't happen, I was there," resonated with everyone who listened to him. Don's perspective on his role in the liberation evolved. As the years progressed, as he had time to reflect, he often pondered on what freedom meant to the survivors he encountered. What did freedom mean? We couldn't feed them. Where would they go? They were still behind barbed wire. What would their lives be like? They had no homes, no family. That night of Yom HaShoah in 2010, David Vendetta, then of the Morning Call, interviewed Don. We are pleased to welcome David back to our program to share his thoughts on the liberation and Don's and other GI's roles in the pivotal moment.
I knew Don Burdick from lunches of the Battle of the Bulge veterans. I'd go there to meet the vets, hear their stories, and write about them. Don always wore a jacket and a tie to these meetings, and in his rich, full voice said the opening prayer. His story was compelling. He was among the U.S. troops surrounded by the Germans at Bastogne. He was among the first Americans to enter Dachau. He took pictures there that he kept for always. On the advice of the Morning Call's editor, I split up Don's story. His account of the Bulge ran during the battle's anniversary in December 2008. His photos of the dead ran the following April, with my story about his Dachau experience. It was in April 1945 that Don's unit a field artillery observation battalion, reached the camp near Munich. He was 21, a private first class. He carried a German camera that he picked up along the way. The following is from the transcript of my interviews with him. There was a noxious odor in the air. I said, "Smells like something rotten." Coming into Dachau, the closer you got, the stronger the odor was. It was putrid. As we were coming down this particular road, there were piles of bodies like you would stack lumber. The Germans had put quicklime on them to burn up the flesh. The smell and sight of decaying bodies was gut-wrenching. I was sick to my stomach for days after that. There were people clinging to the fences. They were emaciated, hardly covered with clothes. One building we looked at, we could see bodies piled like a pyramid. A guy said, "The only way we're going to get them out is to bulldoze the building." I was so disgusted at what I was seeing. For me to explain this to somebody else, I thought the best way to do this was to take pictures. When I developed the pictures, I knew that I had my evidence that I could support the fact that this was an atrocity, that it was a concentration camp, and I could verify what I had seen. Reader response was immediate. It was in line with Don's commitment to get the word out to as many people as possible. An English as a second language teacher at Allen High School said his students were reading the diary of Anne Frank, and he'd be using Don's story in his class. He wrote, "I think it would be a very enriching experience for these students to see how the Holocaust impacted and still does impact people, even within this community." When I passed this message on to Don, he offered to visit the class. An English teacher at Northeast Middle School in Bethlehem asked if Don would speak to her 8th grade class. She wanted to prepare them for a visit by Auschwitz survivor Julius Jacobs. She wrote, "There's no better way to help our students connect with history and truly understand it than hearing it firsthand." Yes, Don spoke to her classes. And in 2010, with me at his side, he spoke here for the Holocaust Remembrance. As a former teacher, Don aced these appearances. He had a presence and a keen ability to communicate. I'm glad I met him, became his friend, and helped get his Dachau story out. The suffering really got to him. He had been at the camp for just one day, a soldier passing through. The gaunt survivors, he noted, were not being cared for. He didn't see any medics while he was there. This suffering and death troubled him for a lifetime. I couldn't believe that the human race could annihilate people in this atrocious way, he said. I had no idea the Germans would go to the length they did at Dachau. Don died 8 years ago at his home in Forks Township. He was 93. His witness to the Holocaust will live on.
And so the lieutenant sent a word in, everybody out, we're about ready to leave. And I can't tell you, it was kind of a mixed emotion as to say, did we really, quote unquote, liberate these people? Now we're going to leave. Now we're going to leave. Well, we just hope and pray that they get enough medical supplies in there, because you were so helpless. They told you don't feed them. They can't eat. Imagine that. Not eating? I know you like to eat. But imagine that, not being able to eat. You eat. You cut your finger, you get a Band-Aid. These people were bleeding in there. Nothing on it. Nothing on it. Bleeding. Nothing on it. You're up there thinking, hopefully and prayerfully they'll have something in nourishment to get these people to save what they can save. We also thought about, well, somebody has to go in there and take those people that had died. Hopefully and pray this time that they get a decent burial. At least someone can say some prayers for these people that probably weren't said before. Boys and girls, there was a Holocaust. I was there. I saw it. I smelled it. And I'm going to prove it to you. Thank you.
We doing it?
What are your memories of liberation?
Well, I remember seeing tanks, didn't know what a tank was. The soldiers coming and talking a little Yiddish, a little whatever they could, the American, and telling us not to eat much. Of course, there were a few girls that spoke a little English, and they translated it to us, and they said, we will bring you canned goods, you will get a piece of meat of it, and we will make you fry a big little potato for you, which was very good because a lot of them had run the diarrhea. And of course my sister and I said we will do what they tell because we want to go home and meet our family. We all tried really to fulfill my father's wish. My father always said, stay together, help each other, and watch each other. And this is exactly what we are doing.
My mother and her sisters were prisoners of the Holocaust, spending almost a year in Auschwitz, some time in Bergen-Belsen and Camp Vennesberg, when towards the end of the war, my mother and her one sister, Margaret, were transported to Mauthausen. The war was ending and the Nazi resources were depleted, and they were hopeful that the Americans were going to come and save them. But while they held on to hope, they still endured 16 days of being locked up with little food and little air. Then on one spring day, Sunday morning, May 5th, 1945, the director of the SS, who they feared so much, came in and said, "You are free." My mother's hope was only that she would see her family again. She knew that her mother was gone because she watched her being led to the gas chamber. However, at this point she was unaware of her father and her brother's whereabouts, as well as her other sister Helen. Liberation meant that they could finally somehow go back to their hometown, where their father instructed them to do after the war, and this is where they would all meet. She had hope for this. As they made their difficult trek back home, they found their sister Helen and also their brother Al. But through different testimonials, they came to realize that their father was murdered as well, only 3 weeks prior to liberation. They knew that there was nothing left for them in Europe, and their aim was to come to America, because they had an aunt and 2 uncles living in New York that had escaped prior to the war. America gave them hope, hope to start a new life where they would be free and live in peace, hope to erase their scars, and hope of freedom. As the daughter of survivors, my parents instilled in me a love for this great country, as well as for Israel. Once they were free and came to America, they were proud to live the American dream, and they were proud to become citizens of the USA. They also instilled in me a love for our homeland, Israel. and ingrained in me that if Israel had existed before World War II, that millions could have been saved with a place to go that would have welcomed them with open arms. The importance of Israel was always at the forefront in our family. Liberation led them to America and led them to embrace both the USA and Israel wholeheartedly, and they passed that down with great determination to myself and my two brothers. As a second-generation Holocaust survivor, I will never stop advocating for our rights in this country, and I will never stop advocating for our homeland, Israel. We must work together as a Jewish community to liberate ourselves from the anti-Semitism once again. My mother never told me this story. I'm not sure she was even aware of it because when she was in Mauthausen, she was pretty much locked up for 16 days. However, I found this story a number of years ago, and it is about the Mauthausen flag, which is at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. It was secretly sewn by inmates of the Mauthausen concentration camp in anticipation of their liberation by American forces. Excuse me. Inmates used a sewing machine in a workshop where prisoners had previously been forced to sew Nazi uniforms. They obtained sheets from the SS laundry for the background panel and used Nazi banners as the material for the red stripes. Not knowing the exact number of stars to affix, they sewed on 56 and waited for the American soldiers, who they prayed might save them. On May 5, 1945, their prayers were answered as U.S. military forces liberated Mauthausen, and the inmates' unique American flag was presented to their liberator, U.S. Army Colonel Richard Seibel, who is pictured here with the flag. He's of Defiance, Ohio. Seibel flew that flag over the liberated camp. After the war, Colonel Seibel presented the flag to one of Mauthausen's liberated inmates, Simon Wiesenthal, the renowned Nazi hunter. America for us was a symbol for all we had lost. I barely weighed 90 pounds that day, and like so many others, I was too weak to walk. But seeing the American flag rekindled something in each of us. Every star on the American flag stood for something precious we had lost. One for hope, one for freedom, and one for justice, recalled Wiesenthal. The Mauthausen flag is on permanent display in the Greatest Generation case in the Museum of Tolerance.
Ich habe aufgewachsen in einem Heim, wo wir haben nur gesprochen Deutsch. I grew up in a home where we only spoke German. My mother was born in Vienna, Austria, and my father in a small village, Kirchgens, so many of Frankfurt. This is a picture of my mother's family. My grandmother is in the back row between the two brothers, and two sisters, one on the left and one on the right. The one on the left, his name was Martin, the one on the right was Olga, and of course my great-grandparents sitting. My grandmother was fortunate because her husband had a sister and brother-in-law living in the United States, and they were able to come out by Italy in October of 1939. So think about the moment World War II had really just begun. Finding out information is not so easy. Olga and her husband could have gone to Israel as Marta and her husband did, but it turned out that that husband, Isidor Schlinger, was a Hebrew teacher. And he said, what am I going to do in Israel? They certainly don't need Hebrew teachers. That fateful thought cost them their lives. In 2019, my wife Toby and I were in Vienna. We went to the synagogue, and in the synagogue, they have a memorial to the Jews of Austria. This is what it looks like at a distance. I'm not sure you can tell, but there are big metal doors with names on it. Next slide, please. But in front of it is a book with the names. Next slide. And of course, when you're searching for your family, you can find them. There you can see Schlinger Isidor and Schlinger Olga. So absolute confirmation of what happened to them. Next slide. This is a picture from Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt we also visited. We left the group. And the reason I wanted to go to Theresienstadt in particular was because my father's parents, they were taken in May of 1942 from their village to Theresien and were there until liberation. This gives you a small idea, and you've seen it already in other pictures as well. Next chart. This is a street in Theresien. Ultimately, I discovered, probably long after my grandmother and my mother had died, via the person who gave us the tour of Theresien, it could be that one of my mother's uncles, that you saw the pictures of, could have lived on this street while he was in Theresien, potentially with his wife and daughter. And one of the things I'll never know when you talk about trying to find the past and what happened, did my father's parents have interaction with these people? And if so, what was it like? How is it that my grandparents survived being in Theresien all that time? I've speculated that grandfather, of course, served in the German army. He was a corporal wounded in World War I. Has he given some consideration? Were they kind to these other Jews? Did they have to be brutal? I don't know. All I can tell you is my grandmother, that one, seldom left her one-bedroom apartment in all the years I knew her. And I wasn't old enough to really fully appreciate the impact of what that experience must have been like. Next shot. It's hard for you to read, obviously, but you can see it's an Aid Society of America, the Hebrew Sheltering and Immigrant Aid. And I believe this one confirms that Olga and her husband were murdered at Auschwitz. So one of the ways one can find information, I imagine still today, is by perhaps being in touch with Hayes. Next shot. In the old days when I had insomnia, I used to go to the computer versus the phone, and I would search for whatever information I could find. You can imagine I was stunned one night when I Googled my father's uncle's name. That's Karl Hummel, which you see up there. And if you look towards the bottom of the box, you'll see Erwin Judah, that was my father, and Isidore and Selma Judah were my grandparents who survived Theresien. And what it says is, in the German, that it's announcing his death, and it gives you the exact date, if you can read it. On the 28th of October in 1944, at the age of, I believe, 62, he was taken in Auschwitz to the gas chamber. At this point, they still didn't know about what happened to various other relatives. Frieda Hamel was his wife. She was the sister of my grandmother. They lived in Frankfurt, which again wasn't very far from Kirchgans, where my father grew up. Norbert and Lottie Hamel were their children. Norbert had somehow the good fortune to be able to get out. He came to the United States in the late 30s and was trying to get his parents and sister out. He never obviously succeeded. And you can see that my grandparents, they're still living in Frankfurt apparently. They looked for Lottie Hamel until 1952, and finally at that point gave up and realized they would never know what became of her. So, to this day, we have no idea. She obviously was murdered. Now, one of the things one can do if you're still looking for names of ancestors is to Google and to look. There are always, I think, new resources being put online. Is that the last picture? I want to mention two things. One is that even when people were able to leave, things happened. My mother and her parents left Vienna, Italy, on a boat. When they were on the boat a few days, a French submarine stopped the ship. Presumably they were looking for a German spy, and they took all the men, including my grandfather, off the ship into the submarine. From there, they took him to Algiers, and from there inland into the desert as German war prisoners. These were all Jews, by the way. Clearly not a spy among them. It was through Hayes, my mother, writing on behalf of herself, and my grandmother wrote. And in 2003, I'm not sure what was happening, she wrote to the Hayes organization and said about finding her father, who survived and came a few months later. It was Hayes that we got in touch with. It was Hayes that seriously looked into the situation. It was Hayes that got my dad released 3 months later. So, you hear about Hayes, then or now, a remarkable organization. The death notice from Kurt Hamel, again, if you're looking for someone from German Jewry, appeared in a German Jewish publication that was known as the Aufbau. The Aufbau from September 1st of 1944 through September 27th of 1946 printed numerous lists of Jewish Holocaust survivors located in Europe, as well as a few lists of victims. So if that's accurate, I was fortunate to find my great uncle. So there are resources. There's Yahrzeit books, if you're familiar with it. If not, speak to your rabbi. Certain communities have made lists. And I was extremely fortunate through a professor in Moravian College, Hans Wirth. He was not Jewish. His father-in-law was a righteous Gentile who saved Jews, taught German and Holocaust studies at Moravian. He found online, he didn't believe there was a village like Kirchgenz. He had never heard of it, despite growing up in Germany and taking students there many times. So after we had lunch one day, he went home and looked, and sure enough, within a couple of hours, he sent me a satellite photo of Kirchgenz, which is really just the village and some fields. But more importantly, shortly thereafter, he told me that people in that part of Germany in 2007, so never think that you might not still find new information. In 2007, they put out what they call the Familienbuch from the towns of Hutzbach, Batzbach, and Kirchgenz, and a couple of others. These villages, the Christians living there in 2007 went through local records, and we all know the story about how the Germans kept meticulous records, and then produced a booklet by community of the different people. And in there, of course, are my father, my grandparents, great uncles, and some technical information, some of which I knew and some I did not know. I mean, I knew they had been in Theresienstadt. I did not know that they had been taken in 1942. So there are a lot of resources out there, and even if you think, it's too late, look at it, here it is, 80 years after Auschwitz, you might be surprised if you have relatives' names, perhaps some dates and locations, there is still information that you can find. We're now going to continue with a responsive reading, which you have on the screen. Today in Yom HaShoah, we call on you, Almighty God, who says in every generation, do not murder. Do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Do not oppress the stranger. May we commit ourselves to one simple act, Yizkor, remember. We continue reading together. The human spirit is the light of God. As we look at these lights, try to imagine 6 million candles, each one with the name of another Jewish person. Each would signify a unique and precious soul who worked, studied, took walks, the ordinary things of life. They all were part of the Jewish people. Each one suffered. Each and every one was murdered. They are lost forever, their light extinguished. We are the light now. Only by our remembering can they live again in our hearts and minds.
We invite Rabbi Judah, Faye, Emily Ford, and Elaine Papier, Neil Glickstein, Vicki Glazer, and anyone who's representing the next generation, so second generation, third generation, to come forward, and we'll be lighting the memorial candles.
I light this candle in memory of the Reinish brothers, their wives and children, in memory of my father-in-law's 7 sisters, my mother-in-law's younger brother and parents, and the other members of my family, some of whose names I don't even know, who were murdered by the Nazis.
I light this candle in memory of my grandparents on both my father's side and my mother's side, 2 uncles on my father's side, Natan and Herschel Fried, and for countless cousins that died at the hands of the Nazis in Auschwitz.
I'd like this candle in honor and memory of my mother, my grandmother, and my great-grandfather who endured the Holocaust in hiding.
As second, third, and fourth generation Holocaust survivors, we light this candle in memory of grandparents, great-grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles, some of whom survived the Holocaust, including my grandma Carrie Roth, and some who perished and unfortunately no longer with us.
I light this candle in memory of my wife's maternal grandparents who were taken from their farm in Paris, France. Maurice Marin and Esther Marin, and leaving their son, my wife's father, at orphan age 14, to roam the streets of Paris. And my wife was very, very obsessed with telling the story of the Holocaust and her father's life of survival to many years of teaching classes in Allentown.
As the second and the third and the fourth, the next generation, we light this candle in memory of our parents, our grandparents, their families, in honor of those who survived and who are not here. And we accept and commit to the responsibility to continue to tell their stories and make sure that we never forget.
We observe a moment of silence.
seated just for a few moments. I'm going to talk about the Sefer Torah that we have here. There were 1,500 Sefer Torah from Bohemia and Moravia, from what is now the Czech Republic, and the reason that these Torahs were stored in a warehouse in Prague was that Hitler wanted there to be a museum. So that when people said, you know, there were these people, they were called Jews, but we got rid of all of them, we murdered all of them, that he could say, and these were their most precious item, Sefer Torah. Every Sefer Torah has a story. It is hard to imagine that when you see a photograph, it can tell a story as well. But can you imagine that the town of Bosavice, its earliest known written recording of this village was 1343. The Jewish community, as far as we understand, came in the 15th century. There, in this medieval town, one of our families at Brit Shalom, the Tico family, their family lived there. There were 2,000 or more Jews. They had a quarter, 1/3 actually, of the town were Jewish. They had a Jewish quarter, about 13 streets, that led into the center of town. It was a thriving Jewish community. They had a yeshiva, they had a beautiful synagogue, and they also had a Talmud academy. It was renowned. This Sefer Torah ended on a shelf in Prague. And one of the few survivors of Bosavice was Charles Tico. And when these Czech Torahs made their way to the Westminster Synagogue, Charles got a call because he was the last, or one of the last, survivors of this town. This would have been the Sefer Torah that Charles Tico used for his bar mitzvah. But he was in hiding at 12. The Sefer Torah, how many baby namings? How many b'nai mitzvah? How many ufrofs, Shabbat readings, holidays, celebration, dancing on Simchat Torah did this Torah witness? And as we will rise in just a moment for the El Maleh, we have not an artifact, but we have a call to memory, not just of the past, but of a Torah that is alive today, that we have a responsibility to ensure that something like the Holocaust, the Shoah, not only never happens again, but as was mentioned, we care for the stranger, the orphan, the widow, the poor. We have a mandate to live these words. Today before you I put life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. We'll rise for the El Maleh Rachamim as we ask God to remember and hold in God's care the souls, the indestructible part of all of those who perished in the Shoah. We are not asked to forgive, We are asked to live our lives in as sacred and holy a way as we can. Male rachamim, shochen b'meromim, amtzei menucha nechona, tachat kanafei hashechina. במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מצירים, את נשמות כל אחינו בני ישראל, שנטבחו בשואה. אנשים, נשים, וטף, שנחנקו ושנשרפו ושנהרגו, שמסרו את נפשם על קידוש השם, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם, אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוח בשלום משכבותיהם, ונאמר Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the souls of our brethren who perished in the Shoah, men, women, and children of the house of Israel, who were slaughtered, suffocated, and burned to ashes. May their memory endure and inspire deeds of charity and goodness in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Amen.
Thank you for remaining standing. A lot of us, we have the custom of standing when we're in mourning, when we're observing a yard site. And it's very personal, right? Some people only stand when it's someone for whom they are obligated to say Kaddish. But all of us witness the loss of our family. 80 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, 80 years after the time when we started we started to have to engage in a kind of project of memory that we would carry with us always ever forward. It's a daunting task. It's harrowing and heartbreaking. But it is a mitzvah in every sense of the word. Just as it is a mitzvah to offer these words of praise despite loss, despite sorrow, despite pain. We praise the Holy One. We join together as a community. We give voice to the voiceless, sharing the joys they might have known, the praises they might have sung, stories they might have told. We tell the stories that we know, and we hold a candle to their memory for the stories that had yet to unfold. Please join me in the Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shmei Rabbah, v'yalma divrach chutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei b'chol Beit Yisrael, v'agala v'zman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah v'varach le'olam le'olam Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh V'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalal, shmei, t'kusha, b'richu. Le'ela in kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran v'yalma, v'yiru amen. Yehei shlama rabba mitshmaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'yiru amen. Oseh shalom b'romach, u'yaseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. May the one who makes peace in the highest heavens bring peace to us, to all our people Israel, to the world, and comfort to all of our hearts, bereaved as we stand in this moment of memory. You may be seated. Our school's program involves bringing exhibits and speakers to high school and middle schools across the region. Mary Lou Lordai is our high school exhibit coordinator, and she joins me for our final presentation this evening.
Michelle Levy, our devoted Holocaust educator and beloved friend, who shares her survivor story and the stories of her family during the Shoah, has most recently been researching the life of her dear uncle, Ledwick Wilner. Ledwick survived many camps, finally escaping from a march to Buchenwald at the end of the war. Ledwick was an accomplished businessman, but his first love was as a prayer leader at the First Orphanage Synagogue. After the war, after liberation, in a search for the family, and to begin the process of rebuilding his own life, Ledwick helped to see the reestablishment of the first Jewish community. This article, written by Ledwick on the October of 1945 back in First Germany, captures the deep desire to continue the chain of Judaism.
Today, on the intermediate days of Sukkot, he writes, we turn our attention once again on past holy days. Once again, we are deeply moved, speaking with thankful hearts. The one who has given us life, sustained us, strengthened us, and brought us to this very moment. Hundreds of people, he continues, Jewish soldiers of the American Army and civilians, the remnants of European Jewry, found themselves gathered in the splendor of the newly re-established, revered Weissmaus Synagogue. In the 4 years during which European Jewry was bleeding to death in the gruesome inferno of the concentration camps, worship in the houses of God was stilled. But is the old tradition, the past spirit that once again reappears? We all feel it. Now is an historical event that we are experiencing here.
The dawning of the new epoch in the old tradition of the first community. Moved to depths of emotion, the congregation stands. As leader Mr. R.E. Stern recalls with tear-choked voice all the men, women, and children who lost their lives in the last 4 years. He recalls the terrible loss of victims that the inhumane and murderous regime enacted. Cantor Wilner chants the prayers. He, the same designated prayer leader until 1941, and who was one of only 8 survivors of the camps to return to this one proud congregation.
The rabbi speaks, his words referring to the serious meaning of this hour, comparing it to the rededication of the temple at Hanukkah. As the high holy days conclude, he writes, their sacred ceremonies bring us a piece of home. Once again, we experience all the joy and greetings, congregants and American soldiers together. We look back with much gratitude in this month of celebration, a month that is the cornerstone of a genuine Jewish life in the new, old community of Fürth. The video clip you will now see is of the first Jewish service held on German soil at the end of the war. It was conducted by American soldiers who felt the enormity of the moment, just as they, by their actions, used the moment of liberation as one for rededicating themselves to a Jewish life and memorializing all those lives lost. We tonight pledge to never forget, to continue this amazing Jewish and human chain of tradition. The past is always with us, part of our present, pushing us always forward.
The first German city to fall to American forces was Aachen, on Germany's western border. There, on October 29th, with Nazi artillery still exploding in the distance, a group of American Jewish GIs held a service that was broadcast around the world.
The National Broadcasting Company, in cooperation with the American Jewish Committee, brings you now a special broadcast of historic significance. With the first Jewish religious service broadcast from Germany since the advent of Hitler.
Lieutenant Max Fuchs, who had been studying to become cantor, volunteered to sing that day.
Well, they asked me to do the service in Aachen, Germany. The GIs wanted it to do some praying, you know, and some singing. So this was my part of the service.
As the U.S. is beginning to occupy Germany, in the middle of these tank barriers, they held a Jewish service, and it was broadcast both over the air in Germany and was also broadcast by NBC. And it's just an extraordinary statement about the defeat of the Nazis, about overturning the horrible policies of Germany against the Jews.
The Jewish chaplain spoke about peace on earth and things like that. And part of the service, it was a wonderful thing, a Yizka service. Yizka means remembering all the GIs that are fallen. You say a prayer for those GIs. That's when it really hit me, you know, what was happening in Europe. Well, it was during that service, things sort of hit you, you know, you get melancholy because you start to think about your family, you know, all the people that I knew. You see, I knew these people because I was 12 years old when I came here from Poland. The cousins I knew, the uncles I knew, grandparents. But when I looked out and I saw so many Jewish GIs, I wasn't the only one. There wasn't one GI there that didn't have an extended family in Europe somewhere, lost. They all perished.
Cantor Wilner wrote that the remnant returned to Furt. We are no longer a remnant. We are the generation that has to tell this story over and over. And one could say also that they were not a remnant. They were the survivors. And it's to that end that we rise together to sing Hatikvah, the hope. We thank you for joining us this evening as we go from darkness to light. Ma'afela Loa. We say Zachor, Gedenkt, remember.